My name is Jaden, and ever since I could remember, I've had synesthesia. For those of you who don't know what that is, it's basically when certain perceptions can intertwine. Such examples are tasting a word, hearing a shape, and for me, it's seeing sound as colours. At first, my parents thought that I was going crazy, so I've kept it to myself for years. As I got older, my perception of sound had grown sharper. I can see the colour of laughter as pink, cries of sadness as blue, and the yells of anger as red. The only person who has ever believed me is my sister, Paige. She's only a year younger than me, so she's been with me through the thick and thin of it. Everyone around me thought that I was losing it, as I would get lost looking at the empty spaces of air around me. But Paige would always ask me what colours I was seeing with astonishment. I loved to see Paige giggle with excitement. Her laughter burst into radiant shades of pink. Now, I could go on and on about the happy moments I've had using my condition to see lovely moments. But that's not why I'm writing here. Up until recently, I've never cursed my ability to see what I see. It all started a couple of months ago, when Paige and I were invited to a party of our friend, John. It was a normal get-together. We lived in a rural area, so the most fun we could have was to sneak out to a field and drink around a bonfire. John was getting ready to ship out for the military, so he wanted to have one giant party before he left. Paige always had a thing for John, so I was more than happy to try and stir things up. Whenever they spoke to each other, the brightest colours would pop out, but that was something I never told them. When we go to the party, there were a lot more people than I thought there would be. It was a friends of friends of friends kind of situation. It was fine. I really liked John, so he deserved the biggest party. After I pushed Paige towards John, I started to mingle with the rest of the partygoers. Most of them didn't even know who John was, but honestly, it was pretty fun to have all these people out here. We live in a pretty small town, so the more the merrier. Everyone I interacted with was really nice, and they drove here from the city. You would expect the standard hipster stereotype from these kinds of people, but they were just here to have a good time. The laughs and shouts exploded into a myriad of colours to me. I loved being around a big party. As I was talking to a small group of people, that was when I met Noah. He came up to me with 2 opened bottles of beer and handed one to me with a smile. He was tall, maybe a bit over 6 feet, with short dark brown hair that was styled to swoop to one side, and he had dark green eyes. He looked a little bit older, but he was cute, so I accepted his beer and shifted my attention towards him. He was unexpectedly creepy. He just kept talking about crazy things like conspiracy theories and rambled on about cryptids. I didn't want to be rude, and I couldn't help my talkative nature, so I stayed and chatted with him. I just kept on getting a weird vibe from him. As I talked to Noah, I swear some of his words looked different to me. Maybe I was just imagining things though, but small wisps of black came from his lips. I shrugged it off. My synesthesia would sometimes show me different colours, so I didn't think much of it. An hour had passed, and he had started to ask me very personal questions, things that were sexual in nature, so I decided that was my cue to go. Just as I was leaving Noah, he had grabbed my wrist. He shocked me a bit, and as I turned to snap at him for grabbing me, he held up his hands to apologize. He asked me for my number, and he looked at me with such puppy dog eyes, I held back my anger. He was probably just an awkward guy, and he lived a few hours away, so I doubt this would have turned into anything. So, I took down his number to appease him. He asked me to text him later. Not my plan at all. Something about him just made me feel so uncomfortable. I tried my best to disappear into a crowd of people, but I felt a chill run down my spine. I turned to see Noah. He stood completely still and stared me down the entire time. He had absolutely no emotion on his face. Needless to say, that made me feel really uncomfortable. So I wanted to find Paige as quickly as possible. It took me a few minutes, but I finally found her laughing with John. The colours of their conversation were so vibrant, I hated to interrupt it. As I walked up to Paige, I suddenly started to feel really sick. Her face shifted to concern when she saw the state I was in. I told her about Noah when John interjected and asked if he needed to do anything about it. But I didn't want to cause a scene. I just wanted to go home, and I started to feel worse and worse. I felt another chill run down my body, and I turned to see Noah within a crowd of people dancing. He just stood there, staring at me. I could see his lips move as wisps of black came from his mouth. I've seen different colours come from people. Sometimes they are associated with some kind of emotion. But I've never seen black come from a person before. It was dark. It swelled into the air like a black tentacle and dissipated into the night. My blood began to run cold as I just stared into his unblinking eyes. Enough was enough. I apologized to John and pulled Paige with me towards our car. Paige was a little surprised, but she quickly composed herself and matched her pace with mine. We walked through the dark field. They had used a truck to run through the area to make a path. As we walked towards our car, the sound of music and people talking faded into nothing. The path we walked on was a dark abyss. We used the flashlights on our phones to light our way. The night was completely silent. Our footsteps crunching on the earth were supposed to be the only things we could hear. But the quick thudding of heavy footsteps was coming from behind us. Someone was running towards us, fast. Paige quickly grabbed my hand and ran forward. I squeezed her hand so tightly and tried my best not to slow us down. We lowered our phones and we were running through the dark path. Our panting echoed as we ran as fast as we could, when we finally reached the area where the cars were parked. We darted towards the direction where we left our car. I turned around to see absolutely no one behind us. I started to feel so dizzy. I couldn't run anymore, so we stopped to catch our breath. That was when my phone started to ring. I looked to see an unknown number, so I ignored it. But it started to call again and again. A notification came up on my screen. I got a message from the unknown caller. It was very inopportune timing, right after we were running for our lives, but I looked at it anyways. At first I was extremely confused. It was a dark and shaky video from somewhere outside. Paige looked at me and asked what was up, but I just stood there, silently watching my screen. I could hear the sound of women panting. It was the sound of us, frantically running. I continued to watch the video of us running out of the field and stopping towards the direction of our car, when the video cuts off. I turn to Paige, and she's standing completely still. I turn around to see Noah facing us with a knife pointed towards us. Paige and I both held our hands up and assured him we would give him all of our money, but that just made him angrier. He pointed a blood-stained knife at me, yelling for me to come with him, all while dark shadows poured out of his mouth. He was a mess, covered in sweat. Hair was wild, and his eyes were bloodshot. I asked him what he wanted from me, but incoherent spittle and shadows shot from his mouth. His words started to become muffled, and my vision started to blur, as I suddenly started to feel tired. I didn't know where this came from, until I remembered my stupid ass drank his beer. His open bottle of fucking beer. He had drugged me, and it was taking effect. I tried to steady my vision as I looked back towards Paige, and she let out a terrified shriek. appearing from Paige's scream, was a burst of sickly yellowish brown. I've never seen this happen before. It was like seeing a nauseous toxic air leave her body. I followed her gaze to see John quickly limping towards us while holding his bleeding stomach. John weakly called out for us to run, but I barely had the strength to push on. Paige tried to pull me towards her, but I instantly fell to the ground, pulling her with me. I felt a yank coming from my right ankle, as Noah dragged me towards him, as if I was some rag doll. Paige had my arm with both hands, and frantically tried to pull me. Tears streaming from her eyes, and that disgusting colour of fear coming from her screams.
"Stop! You fucking bitch, she's mine!"
Noah shouted at the top of his lungs. A swirling tendril of black and red rose from his throat as he dropped my leg and darted towards Paige. I wished Paige would have just let me go and run, but she was so determined to get me out of there. My vision became clouded with that foul yellow-brown mist as Paige let out a scream as I heard the sound of the blade sink into her shoulder. Blood began to spray as he removed the knife and stabbed it repeatedly into my sister. I felt my consciousness begin to slip away. My eyes began to close, and the colours began to fade away. I let out my own blood-curdling yell. The colour of my cries mixed with the chaos of the commotion around us. Crying, yelling, cursing, blood, it painted a scenery of hell for me at that moment. I felt so helpless, and my body became lighter and weaker. I closed my eyes, and everything was silent. And my face began to cry in pain as I felt my body being dragged on the earth. It was just a bit, but the pain was able to wake me up a bit. Paige, my sister, where is she? Why can't I hear her? I forced my eyes to open. Everything was spinning, and I turned towards Noah, who was dragging me into the fields by my ankles. I gathered up all the strength I could, and suddenly kicked at him. He was caught off guard and stumbled backwards onto his arse. I could feel myself get woozy again. I tried my hardest to stay awake, but the drugs were hitting me. I looked around and saw Noah's knife lying on the ground, and picked it up. Before I was able to completely lose consciousness again, I plunged the blade into my left hand. It hurt. The pain was immense, and I let out another cry. It wasn't that sickly colour of fear, but a fierce red of anger that came out from my yells. I was fully awake. Blood poured out of my hand, but Noah was the target of my hatred. Before I could repay him for all that he did to my sister, the screeching of tires began to surround us. The night was flooded with flashing red and blue lights, and police officers got out of their patrol cars. With guns raised, they demanded that I drop my weapon, which of course I complied. We were taken to a hospital and were questioned soon afterwards. We were all sent to separate rooms during our recovery. Apparently John had noticed Noah following us in the field and pursued him, but he got stabbed when he tried to stop him. While John continued to go after Noah, he had called the police and told them their location. Paige was stabbed multiple times on her arms to prevent her from grabbing me. Thankfully, she'll be okay. Noah, on the other hand, will be facing serious jail time. Some time has passed since then, and though our physical injuries have healed, our mental ones will take a bit more time. I still enjoy some of the colours I see from happy laughter and conversation, but the other night, I felt sick to my stomach. We went to a bar the other day, and I noticed some people sprinkled into the crowd. As they talked to people trying to pick them up, I saw wisps of black pour from their mouths.
Hello, listeners. If you enjoyed this story, please check out the author in the description.
For more content, leave a like, comment, and subscribe for more sinister readings.